Welcome to this video on exit cards. It is part of the series Small Teaching, Big Learning. Let's start with terminology. Exit cards are also called ticket out the door, exit slips, exit ticket, whatever you call them. They are short assignments, typically in the form of a prompt that students complete and turn in as they leave the class. What they do is powerful. In this presentation, I'm only going to focus on 3 uses, and in later presentations, I will come back to other uses. The 3 uses for this presentation are exit card for supporting formative assessment, exit cards for amplifying student voice, and exit cards for keeping track of attendance and participation. Let's start with formative assessment. Typically, it is defined or described in relation to diagnostic assessment, which happens before instruction and is typically used for placing students in one class or another, and summative assessment, which happens after instruction is done, typically to assess learning and to give a grade. Formative assessment happens during instruction, and it's assessment for learning. It's been called informative assessment because it informs teachers, students, and programs. In respect to HL teaching, it connects to this third domain, which is about differentiating instruction. Remember that our HL learners are very different from each other. Formative assessment and exit cards as a tool of formative assessment can help inform teachers about where students are at any point in the learning sequence. Formative assessment and exit cards as a tool are also important for fairness. Keep in mind what happens in most departments. They have 1 or 2 HL classes. So all sorts of students get dumped into them, regardless of their actual level. It's not unusual to get an HL class with a learner who was born abroad and has a fair amount of facility in the HL, to have that learner sitting in the same class as a learner who is a 3rd generation speaker of the HL and thus is at a much lower level of proficiency. Our job as teachers is to make sure that all learners, from the most advanced to the least advanced, all learners that end up in our class have a shot at performing well. So formative assessment and exit cards give teachers critical information that they need in order to respond to the needs of particular students as well as the class as a whole. For students, it encourages learner autonomy, learner efficacy, metacognition about what's happening in the class and how they need to proceed in order to get to a good endpoint. And for programs, formative assessment provides critical information about the student population such that they can design better curricula and programs. Now let me tell you about how I use exit cards for formative assessment. One use is to give learners a map of learning. This is what James Lang also refers to as unpacking learning. The prompt I'm about to show you is one that I use when I teach orthographic accents. Orthographic accents in Spanish, for whatever reason, pose serious challenges to our heritage language learners. So we spend a lot of time working on them, and students feel a lot of frustration with them. So I used this prompt to unpack learning for them, to give them the steps to mastering orthographic accents, and then to engage them in self-evaluation. Let me read the prompt to you. To write accents, you need to be able to hear where the accent falls in a word, know the basic rules of accentuation, and practice until the process becomes automatic. And then I ask students to assess their abilities in each of these skills. Typically, they will turn in an answer in a 3x5 card. How do I use the feedback from this prompt? Well, I may, upon reading all the cards, realize that the entire class is lost on 1 or more of these skills, in which case I'm going to reteach the entire topic to the whole class. There's no point in moving forward until students have a good grasp on this material. On the other hand, I may read through the cards and learn that some students are struggling with hearing the location of the stress syllable. Others don't know the rules. And a third group can hear, knows the rule, but hasn't practiced enough. This gives me a perfect opportunity to divide the class into 3 groups and give them each different kinds of assignments so they can address their particular needs. Here's another use of exit cards: to amplify student voice. This connects to the second domain of HL teaching, which is about designing curricula and instruction that addresses HL learners' motivations, goals, and that reflects their life experiences. I use the prompt I'm going to show you to give learners a sense of belonging. James Lang has also called this use of instruction to give learners inspiration. So here's a prompt I actually asked in a class: describe an aha moment from today's reading and discussion. And here's an answer I got from one of my students. My aha moment was seeing myself and my community reflected in the class examples. This is really important because we know that many HL learners study their language to find themselves, to find their identity, and also to connect with their culture, and through their culture and language, establish ties and connections to other HL speakers, to local communities of speakers, as well as to international communities of the language. And so I use the feedback from the exit cards to build on that, to encourage discussions where students amplify their voices about this. With the answer I got from that card, I can bring that back and read it in the class, and then use that to encourage a discussion where I ask students to tell me how they see their communities reflected in the reading and in the discussion that we did the day before, and to tell me or to tell each other why this is important. These are rich experiences that keep our learners engaged and interested in the material. Why does this matter? Because we know from research that students come to the classroom to connect with other students, to find themselves. I like to read you this comment that was made by a student of mine and published in a book that I wrote with Tom Beeman, Voices, Student Lives, Latino Students on Life in the United States. This student says, my friend and I were called the Mexican kids. This was always funny to me because my dad's family always told me I was American. In school, I was labeled Mexican, but to the Mexicans, I am an American. It's this weird duality in which you're stuck in the middle. Latinos are often told that they're not Americans, but also that they're not connected to their heritage. You may never be fully embraced by either side. And now notice the important bit in red. That's why you seek out other people like yourself. Socializing with people who share a common experience helps you deal with this experience. This is a fundamental concept in HL teaching, to bring your students together, to understand what it means to be a heritage speaker, and to navigate 2 languages and 2 cultures. And so exit cards can help you do this depending on how you formulate the prompt and then how you debrief it in the classroom. Finally, the third use of exit cards is for the attendance and participation grade. Before I discovered this use, I used to sit there and keep track of who was saying what and how many answers a particular student had. It was tedious and fraught with errors because I would lose track sometimes of this information. A fairer way to do this is through the exit cards, right? You collect them at the end of class. It tells you right away who was there and who wasn't. And more importantly, it gives you the opportunity to assign a grade for students actually saying something related to a question that you asked. Many times in HL classes, as well as in language classes in general, shy students have a lot going on up here, but they're afraid of raising their hand and speaking, particularly if they have linguistic insecurities. Exit cards give a voice to these students. What I typically do is I read these exit cards and I bring them to class the next day. I read them out loud without identifying the students, and I let others opine on what I am reading, as well as contribute their own insights. Other uses, I'm sure you have them. And so we ask you to share them in your comments, as well as other ideas from this video, such as ideas for formative assessment, any questions you may have, whatever you think will help other viewers such as yourself. And for that, we also encourage that you use this presentation in collegial circles. Get together with fellow teachers in your school and talk about other uses of exit cards. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you like it. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and share it with others. Thank you.